Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Music Masterclass for today, Thursday, February, February 11th, 2021. And my name is Marc Sabatella, the director of the Mastering MuseScore School. This is my weekly series of music master classes where we talk about creating music. And specifically, I usually mean, writing it, composing music, arranging music. Um, I do want to mention that my background as a jazz improviser, I'm very much in very much an improviser, and I've kind of put it out there that people could record stuff and put it up, and I haven't been so good about checking those when people have done that. But definitely, if people have things where you feel like a recording of your music is a better way of presenting something to me, by all means do that and post into the course. So I need to do some like business stuff here of like posting the link into the chat. Um, so this is link to my courses. And so if you're not already enrolled in the course, I mean, it's free, but go ahead and do that so you can post into the comments there and add stuff other than on musescore.com. That's where I'm usually going to find stuff to comment on, is on musescore.com. So, uh, where was I saying? I'm saying that, yeah, I do definitely want to be able to give feedback on stuff that's not just notated music. I will say it's a little harder because then we're definitely dealing with audio synchronizing issues, and I don't necessarily know what it is I'm hearing. If it's an improvisation, if someone can tell me what you're improvising, the chord progression is over. If it's a performance of a already composed piece, it's not something that I'm as comfortable talking about your performance of an already composed piece, but I'm not opposed to it either, I would say. Um, but I'm definitely mostly focused on the creation aspect of things. So, all of that said, how's everyone doing? I see the check-ins from around places, and I'm always happy to see where people are. Hopefully, people are having a good day so far. And I've uh, I've been looking at some of the music that people have submitted, and am I really not live? Hmm. I'm live. Yeah, I'm live. Okay, cool. Uh, so I want to just dive right into some of the stuff that's been submitted and show something. So one of the things that I want to show first is a really short little exercise, and those of you who have enrolled in my harmony and chord progressions course will recognize this as the one of the first exercises I give. That basically I give you a melody, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and some chord symbols, and ask you to arrange it in four parts. And it's a great exercise for really thinking through how to do four-part writing. And four-part writing is such a fundamental skill to so many things, right? It's how we write for string quartet as well as writing for choir. It's how you write for piano. Really, you want to have control of these voices. So I just want to play through this submission here and just talk about a couple things in it. Beautiful. So if you haven't done much in the way of four-part arranging like this, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, it's definitely worth spending some time on. And again, if you go to my site, if you're not already enrolled in that harmony and chord progressions course, definitely something I would recommend. But there's all sorts of other resources for learning these skills. And let me go ahead and load that score into MuseScore just so I can say a couple things about it, and then I'll get into some other things. There are some really basic principles that are just uh, good to have in mind when you're writing, and being and writing in this really specific context helps you maybe focus on these things. And they have to do with voice leading. making sure that each voice is doing something interesting in itself, and vertical things of making sure that your chords sound the way you want them to sound at all points. And so, in this example, like I look at this and I think, well, gee, I think I wrote this. And I think that's exactly what I wrote in my demonstration, but I also think that there's not a whole lot of choices in the matter. If I give you these chords and you just want to write some half notes, these are really straightforward ways of doing it. And look at how the alto voice has this nice D, E, F sharp, G sharp, right? It's a really nice little line in the alto. The tenor voice is keeping the common tone G between the G, 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 and the alto voice again. D, D, can I sing this? D, D. Okay, I can't sing that high. You all know that. D, 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 F sharp. Maintaining that, even if you're not literally writing for voices, just really just adds so much to your music that it's just something you really want to think about even when you're writing for piano and you think, oh, fingers, they can go anywhere. But yeah, it's going to sound better to the ear when they do these things. And so we have this repeated note, this common tone G that was held there. But in the next chord, it jumped to a D. But it didn't jump for no good reason, right? It jumps to a D because that's needed to fill out the chord. The bass note B was kind of given. I said I wanted a B minor chord, and the melody was B. So we've already got that B doubled there. And then the alto kind of wanted to go to that F sharp, but that implied tenor voice leaping to the D. And that's fine. Leaps are good, they create interest. But then, maybe after that leap, you follow it with this more stepwise line. And so that's just really just common sense kind of stuff. Now, I will mention that if for whatever reason I didn't want that leap there, oh, and I say I, and again, this was a student whose name I think is also Mark. Wait a minute, yeah, Mark Friedman. So uh, if Mark had not wanted, if he looked at this and said, "Gee, I really don't want that leap there. What else could I do?" Well, there's a few things you could do. One is say, "Well, how about if I just go to the B? Then it's not as big of a leap, but now you're missing the third on the chord. That would not be an improvement. I don't want to hear that sound without the D." However, I could have then chosen to take the F sharp down to D, and instead of going to F sharp on that B minor, have a D in there. So I have the third. Now this situation here, I have the root tripled B, but no F sharp. You can do that. It's not necessarily ideal, but whatever. Maybe this guy could go down to an F sharp now. You try that. So vertically, this is fine. That's a beautiful spacing on that B minor chord. The root's doubled. The other two notes are both accounted for. But you know what this is? Parallel fifths, right? I have perfect fifth here between the C and the G, and then B to F sharp. The perfect fifth followed by another perfect fifth is something we typically avoid in this genre, in this kind of style of writing. So uh, it's parallel fifths aren't inherently bad, and I've mentioned before, a lot of rock music, a lot of guitar, that the idea of a power chord is basically a perfect fifth, and moving power chords around is a thing, absolutely, in rock music. It's part of that style, but it's not part of this style. So I just pointed all this out because um, when you really get down to it and you start working these things out, you realize often there's not a lot of choices. And so when I saw what was first here, I was like, well, I think that's what I wrote when I did my demonstration, but it's also pretty much what anyone would write because anyone is going to go through that same series of gyrations and realize, yeah, this one didn't work for that reason, this one didn't work for this other reason, and you end up where you end up, right? So we're all going to pretty much write the first couple bars more or less the same on here. But that said, there's certainly possibility for differences. I could have chosen to take this guy to a C and this one to the E. That's legitimate. Now it's a more bottom-heavy arrangement of notes, but that would then let me do having the F sharp here and the G there, and I wouldn't have parallel octaves or anything like or parallel fifths. That is also a legitimate way of doing this that kind of balances all the things you want to balance, but it definitely makes the bass and tenor kind of close together towards the bottom of the chord. As I said, it's a little bottom heavy, is how I would see it. The notes aren't as spread. The bottom three voices are only within an octave versus spread out more than an octave. So these things of thinking about the spread of your notes, that's part of what you want to think about also when you're doing this. So really, there was just a lot of really good things going on here, and I feel like everything is working the way it should work. Um, I especially like the use of the inversion here. I love the sound of that. I love G, B, D as opposed to just G, G, D. I didn't ask for that inversion, but I totally, because I gave the chord symbols. I gave the chord symbols and I think the Roman numerals, and the melody and the bass basically uh, followed from that. And your task was to fill in the inner voices. So I love that use of that inversion, and I love how he then also saw that now that the bass has moved from G to B, uh, instead of keeping the B in the tenor, said, "Well, now we're missing a root. I better have the tenor come down to that root." So these two voices got to exchange positions. Um, and so yeah, all of that kind of stuff when you change a root, or not change the root, change the bass note. If you change one note in one voice while a chord is staying the same, you got to account for that note. The G, this was the only voice doing the G. So if this voice leaves the G, someone else should take the G. So these are good principles being followed here, and it's really a great demonstration of these principles. The only thing I would comment about it that was surprising to me that I probably would have done differently is this passage here, which I actually like. So this chord right here is, I would say, more dissonant, right? The bass, the passing tones in the bass are not a bad thing, but it definitely creates quite a bit of dissonance. The C against that F sharp is a tritone. The C against the B is a major seventh. The C against the D, the tenor, is a major ninth. Those are all dissonances. So this actually created quite a bit of dissonance right on that beat. Dissonance isn't bad, but it's definitely something. I mean, dissonance is good. We want dissonance. We want to have dissonance, and then we want to resolve it. And this totally does resolve it. It resolved it nicely by moving by step. So to me, it's fine. It works. It somehow subjectively feels a little pushing it beyond, because everything else wasn't pushing dissonance that much. Um, but that's okay. Sometimes you wanna push something somewhere, but it is like the only place I looked at, I was like, "Oh, I probably wouldn't have done that." Everything else I think I would have done. I like how it sounds, so I'm not gonna complain about it. I just wanted to call attention to it as a sort of an interesting choice being made. Also, the use of these parallel thirds in the soprano and alto is really nice also. There's there's advice you will get to not have too much of that because it's so addicting. It's so addictive, it's so compelling to have a melody harmonized in parallel thirds or parallel sixths. Um, and so they will tell you don't get caught up in doing that too much because now it doesn't feel like you're doing as much interesting stuff. Try to have more uh, contrary motion where one voice is moving down and another one's moving up, or oblique motion where one voice stays steady and another one moves. These are counterpoint principles that you will learn about. And they'll tell you not to do too much of this parallelism, but not too much of it doesn't mean none of it, right? I think this is really effective here. And I love how he carried it through so that the next beat started with a G here to continue, right? The melody is B, but he has a G in the alto to continue those parallel thirds, even though that G is not in the B minor chord. He chose to wait until the F sharp, wait until beat 2 to kind of give me that F sharp in the chord. So in some ways, that really turns this first chord from a B minor chord to a G chord in first inversion. But that's okay. So anyhow, yeah, that I really appreciated how that all worked, and thinks that he just did a marvelous job with that. This is actually I was going to point out about that. Losing the G sharp here, I'm a little disappointed on beat 4 that I can't hear the third of the chord anymore. Right? I don't hear that G sharp. I'm not sure that that bought anything. I think if this had just stayed G sharp for the full measure, I don't think you would have lost anything, and I think you probably would have gained actually from it. And if you wanted the sound of quarter notes, you could repeat it, right? Yeah, I think I would have done that. And if you wanted, maybe throw in another passing tone in there. I don't know. But that's something you do watch out for, at least that I watch out for, is that if you lose the third of your chord, I heard the sound of that opening up a little bit, that third kind of disappearing. It's not the end of the world when it happens, but it is a sound that you want to pay attention to. And notice, by the way, that this is the same G sharp here, G sharp here. This G sharp is like the leading tone into the A that's following, and it doesn't resolve, right? This G sharp comes down to E, it doesn't go up to A. Well, that's because that would have involved doubling that A, and he didn't want to do that. And I agree that probably wouldn't have been the best thing to do. And the same story here. This G sharp kind of wants to go up to A, but that's where the soprano is going. And it's okay to put the soprano and the alto on the same note. It's okay, but it's not it shouldn't be your go-to there. So goo goo gaga, what did I miss? Wow. I see. These are abbreviations. Okay. Okay. That must be Michael Olson. All right. Good to see you. Um, so Goo Goo Gaga, I've been teaching an ear training course at a local university here, and we're doing solfege, so we're doing do re mi fa sol, and then the chromatic syllables fi and si, and then we're learning rhythm using the syllables ta and ti and tiki taki no taki tiki and all this stuff, and so I'm getting lots of nonsense syllables in my head. So anyhow, this type of thinking and doing these sorts of exercises of taking really simple pieces and working through the how to deal with them in 4 parts like this can be really a useful thing to do. Highly, highly recommended. So what I want to do next, though, is turn to one of the longer, well, one of the pieces that was submitted specifically for the music masterclass. So again, that was submitted as part of my harmony and chord progressions course, which again, commercial announcement, highly recommended. You learn a ton learn a ton about chord progressions if you work through that course. Um, but yeah, someone did this really cool thing, Sam. It sounds awesome to me, and I want to again kind of work through myself what's actually going on in this piece because um, I haven't done that yet. I listened to it. I was like, wow, I love this. A lot of it I understand right away, and some of it I'm going to have to think about, and I'm going to think about with you. So, Sam, if you're here, great job. And let me put the link in the chat. Okay, Michael says, here's an idea for the last piece: alto 6 measure F sharp, A, G. Okay, alto, sixth measure, F sharp, A, G. So where where are you looking at here? Are you talking about starting at the beginning, F sharp here, maybe? Um, F sharp, A, G, and also I'm not so sure about the G sharp maybe, over the E7. But if you mean like F sharp here, that fills out this chord nicely, so that's fine. A is nice. It gives me a seventh and actually lessens the dissonance a little bit, and then come down to the G sharp. So let's see if that's what you mean. Yeah, I like that a lot. I like the crunch of those two. Not everyone is going to like the crunch of the second at the top of the voicing, but I'm a fan personally. For that matter, whether or not this is what you meant, it could have gone A, G sharp, right? Like this, where we put the A on the B. Now I'm moving the crunch here, and it's a suspension, but not really a suspension. The A is not held over from the previous from the previous chord. Technically a suspension. This would have had to have been held over from the previous chord, but yeah, I love that sus sound. But it also could have gone, if I wanted to make sure it was following all the classic rules for suspension, then I just make sure I prepare that A. Yeah, I like that. Or let that A not repeat, but just sound. So any of those are possibility, and any of those might have been exactly the thing. So, all right. Yeah. So anyhow, I'm going to turn my attention now to this piece uh, from Sam because it's really cool, and in some ways, it's taking what I just was talking about and then expanding on this. And there's something about it that feels very much like an exercise, but making music out of it, which I just love. So let's hear this. Yeah, Sam, that is just remarkable. I really, really love the sound of that. I think you just did just an amazing job. Um, okay, so yeah, I'm gonna load this thing up into MuseScore, and I will let you continue to discuss the finer points of what's going on there in the chat. Looks like an interesting little side discussion about muting and things. Yeah, so someone, if you're doing an ensemble score and you've been using the mixer to kind of like help you focus on individual parts, that's definitely good advice to undo that before you upload it, or else we won't hear the parts the way you intended. Okay, so that piece, there's so much going on in it. First of all, as far as like just looking at the title and thinking through what I see in it, I can tell you that what I imagine is going on is that these are conceptually four-note voicings, but he is kind of retweaked them to be uh one to be kind of one note at a time to form arpeggios and so forth. But at some level, this is just a 4-note voicing here. These are all pretty much a couple passing tones there and there, but they're mostly 4-note voicings that we could look at in just that way. So this is B and G, G and B, and then A, E and A, and then D and G, and then D and F sharp. Okay, there's an F sharp in the key signature, so let's make that happen. Oh, wait a minute, is it in the key signature? Yeah, it's in the key signature. And then the bottom I have G, D, F sharp, D, G, D, F sharp, D, and then I have E, and I'm going to call it C, and I'm going to say that the B was just a passing tone that happened there, and then D, B. So we could just listen to these voicings. Oops, this is F sharp. There we go. Let's listen to that again. And then compare that to how he kind of orchestrated for piano, but rearranged it. So by making a melody, it's still ba-da-da-dum. It's still that. It's still what we had here. Except in his version, he's added the da boop ba doo dum do ba woo dum. Right? He's made a melody out of it, but at some level, the basic voice leading is still B to A to G to F sharp. And there's actually a kind of a term for this that you should know. The term is compound melody. And I can still follow the the B to A to G. I can follow that despite that D there. It's almost like that's a fifth voice. That D is not, even though it's technically the same voice as the A. The A is going A, D, A, G. Even though that's technically one voice doing that, you could conceive of it as splitting into two voices, A, G, and the other one going D. So you could really think of it that way and really just add the D on top of there, and then add a B here. And I think of that D as being a fifth voice, this B as a fifth voice. Now, there is no fifth voice in that third chord, and so he's not using that fifth voice consistently, and no one says you would have to. But when you break it down that way, it's easier to maybe follow what's happening voice leading wise. It's the B going down to A, and the D is being this sort of temporary extra voice that happens in there. And you don't even have to think of it as an extra voice. You could just say it's something happening melodically. But to me, it's both. And that's part of the charm. The beauty of it is that these top notes actually do connect well. And eventually you get into passages where these passing tones form little melodies that, like this little. So that these moving lines, I don't know. They just do really, really nice things. That's all I can say. So here, I don't really hear that as a fifth voice. They're just moving lines, and it's still the case that I would take the downbeat as my basic voicing. The basic motion here is C to D, or maybe it's C E D, because the C and the E are both chord tones. The D is just a passing tone. You could choose to see C and E as separate voices in this sort of texture if that's helpful to you. Here also, G, B, A. The G leads to the A, but the B also leads to the A. So these lines are kind of converging on those notes, and that's part of what makes me at all hear it as like almost as if there was a fifth voice in there. Um, so so a question here about syncopation um, is I don't know. How do you know when to use syncopation? So first of all, let's define syncopation a little bit. Um, the term syncopation, it gets tossed around, and at some gut level, most of us probably have an idea of what syncopation means, but maybe not everyone can put a real specific definition to it. Feel free to put up yours in the chat, how you if you think you have a specific definition for syncopation. I do. I have a fairly specific definition that I can give that I think it holds water pretty well. And it's going to go like this. You can divide depending on how deeply you zoom into your music, you can always look at any given note as either being on a strong beat or a weak beat. And yeah, there's the levels of weakness. Beat 2 is weaker than beat 1 rhythmically, but on the other hand, within beat 2, 2 is stronger than the and of 2. So and of 2 is weaker still. But within the and of 2, if you add 16th notes, the and of 2 is stronger than the 2E and right? So it's stronger than its neighbor. Anyhow, there's stronger and weaker beats. And you can be pretty specific about what that is. That in any pair of beats, any pair of notes, the first one of the pair, the odd numbered beats are stronger than the even numbered beats. The beats are stronger than the ands. The and is stronger than the that follows. In other words, everything breaks down that way. Well, okay, so my definition of syncopation, all of that said, is a weak beat not followed by a strong beat. That's my definition of syncopation. So if you have the following, that's 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I said that 2 is weaker than 1 or than 3. So if I write, if I write this rhythm, I put a note on 2 that was not followed on 3 by a note on 3. It was just a rest on 3. Or it could even be a half note. As long as there's not a new sound on 3, what this means is I played a note on a weak beat and did not follow it with another note on the following strong beat. That's my definition of syncopation. Playing a note on a weak beat and not following it up with a strong beat. You can think of it as a tension release in the same way that we can talk about leading tone resolving to tonic or 5 resolving to 1. There's a sense of tension and you expect it to resolve. If you play a 5 chord and don't resolve it, you have like if I go to the end of this song here and I delete, oh, he doesn't end with a 5 to 1, it's a 4 to 1. It won't be as satisfying. So I'm going to go to Mary Had a Little Lamb. That, my friends, is unresolved unresolved tension. That 5 chord at the end, you kind of wanted something there, right? Oh, by the way, I just noticed now that there's no actual G in this G with a B, this G with a D in the bass. So I feel like there probably should be, so I'm going to make there be. Traditionally, in the second inversion chord, you double the bass note, and he has that bass note doubled here, and so it's this note is where I would put the G, but I don't think I'm going to like that. I don't think I'm going to like it. It's too jumpy. Yeah, not so much a fan. I think I liked the doubled B just fine, but I think maybe this would be to make me happy. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to play with that more. Oh, maybe now this gun can go up to a D. Oh, except I'm gonna have parallel octaves there, so that's why he did it. So yeah, he knows what he's doing. He's making good choices here. Anyhow, I just left off on a 5 chord. That's unresolved tension. And it's syncopation in that it was a note on beat 4, not followed by one on beat 1. So that's that is my definition of syncopation. So as for when do you do it? Colleen's original question. I don't know. You do it when you want to do it. Um, in in a jazz context, we expect so much to be syncopated. We expect there to be so much syncopation. It's almost surprising when it's not there. But the more traditional use of syncopation is to create surprise. So, like a classic example in Mozart, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-doo, bum, ba-da-dum, 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 ba-da-doo, ba-da-doo, bum. That is the syncopation. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-doo, ba-da-doo, bum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-doom, ba-da-dum, ba-da-doom, ba-da-doo, bum, ba-da-dum. So those were syncopations. Did a one, did a dum, did a one, and did a dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, did a dum, did a dum, did a one, and did a dum, ba-da-dum. So those ands that are not followed by something on the beat are syncopations, and they create that little sense of surprise. But then everything else, it's only able to be at all surprising because everything else isn't that way, right? As soon as you start syncopating everything, nothing is syncopated anymore, right? If I go, oh, this is like a thing. If you go, I'm clapping on the offbeats right now because I'm thinking 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, or I'm thinking 1 and 1 and 2 and 1, 2, 1, 2. However, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I didn't change my clapping at all. I just changed my counting. At some point, that ceases to become at all surprising. Your ear just processes it as a regular pattern. Yeah, it might be patterns on the offbeat like this. We have this note coming in on beat 2 every time, but I don't think of it as syncopated. Something happening on beat 2, every measure there, and yes, that's causing a syncopation in some sense, but it's such a repeating pattern that we don't hear it that way. It's more like boom chick, boom chick, boom chick, boom chick, boom chick, boom chick, which is kind of just a repeating pattern. So strong and weak beats in 4/4, look at a ruler. Yeah, and actually looking at a ruler and dividing it up and thinking about 4 is actually a really significant magic number here. There's a system that I learned at one point that I think is actually quite useful. Takadimi as names for the 4 parts of a rhythm. So in 4/4, 4 quarter notes, we call it takadimi. These come from Indian classical music. But if we talk about eighth notes, we can also put those same 4 syllables, takadimi. Um, and in fact, but I can also do that with 16th notes. Actually, let's do this the way I know how to do it because I wrote this code. Oops, wrong way. I wrote it, but I forget which way it goes. There we go. So we can put those syllables, whether we're talking about 4 quarter notes, taka di mi, we can talk about them as eighth notes, taka di mi, or we can talk taka di mi, taka di mi. Either way, if you break these things down into 4s, you can give names to their position. So I don't have to talk about 2 being, well, it's strong relative to this, it's weak relative to this. Here, that's ka, but here beat 2 is D. Here beat 2 is ta again. And what I can tell you is in any Takadimi breakdown, ta is your strongest beat, D is your second strongest beat, ka and mi are both weak, always weak, and they're kind of equivalently weak. And this holds up really well. And so you can write a rhythm in quarter notes or in eighth notes or in 16th notes, and it could be basically the same rhythm. And I will tell you, anytime you have D that is not followed by a ta, or ka that's not followed by a D, or mi that's not followed by a ta, any of these weak things that are not followed by the next stronger thing. So for ka, the next stronger thing is D. For mi, the next stronger thing is ta. For D, the D is, as I said, it's half strong. It's not as strong as ta, but it's stronger than ka or mi. So D kind of needs to be followed by a ta. This is how you can put really, really specific, language to what syncopation is. So anyhow, if you go through this, first of all, you'll notice that these chords are diatonic for quite a long time. No accidentals, right? And yet there's color because as we can see, these chords, this is a D chord, right? This is a G chord here, G chord, and this is a D chord with an F sharp in the bass, and this is a C chord with an E in the bass. And then this third chord, was it really a B minor chord or is it more of a G chord? No, it's really a B minor chord. There's not a G happening in it. So it's a B minor chord with a D in the bass. But I say this is a D chord with an F sharp in the bass, and yet there's, let me turn off the chord symbol playback because his voicings are better than MuseScore's voicings for sure. So no chord symbol playback. There we go. So this E is not in the chord, right? It's a ninth or a second. And same with the D on the C chord. This D is, it's the ninth or the second of that C chord. So he's using ninths. He's using color tones in these. And that's why in the name of the thing, he's calling them jazz voicings. Yeah, these are typical kind of jazz voicing-y sounds here with these ninths worked into these major chords. I say that, and I would do this all the time, but but I do have to say that there are people I know who really don't like the sound of that added ninth on major chords because it's sort of a cliched pop sound also. I don't care. Triads are cliches and they've been used for hundreds of years. That's not a bad thing. So I don't want to get wrapped up on that. But every once in a while I do smile when I see someone get down on people for using a ninth because it's too cliched. I'm like, well, what triad is better? It's less cliched when it's been around longer and used more. No, so it's a pretty sound. Let's own it. Let's use it. So these are all kind of pretty sounds that happen here, and again on the next chord it becomes a C chord. It's a C major seventh because it's got that B held over. Here, the sustain on MuseScore's playback is a little disappointing because I don't get to hear that D still ringing. The internal synthesizer loses that D a little too soon, and so I don't get to hear that D in this measure. So I wanted to hear that. So let me hear this. So by taking away the tie, I was able to hear that D that I wanted to hear. It's not even crunchy. That second is just pretty. It's a smear or something. But I think on a real piano, the bigger the piano, on a grand piano, certainly that D would ring. The shorter the strings on the piano, the less resonance you're going to get. So on some pianos, yeah, that D might not ring all that long, and you'd be a little disappointed by what happened. Just like MuseScore's playback there was a little disappointing. And then he's got nice little things happening, like this G that came in on beat 3. Held over. It's another form of syncopation, right? We got something on beat 3, which, by the way, there's different takadimi syllables for 3/4. And there's a couple different ways of doing it. But the easy way I would say is think of it as a takadimi followed by a taka. So if 4/8 notes in here is takadimi ta, this is a ta. But it's, or maybe actually takadimi dimi is better because that way I can see the D as being weaker than the ta. So taka dimi dimi would be better. But there's other syllables, tava kidi dama, and other syllables that are used in this system. So it gets really deep into this. And in Indian classical music, you go far deeper because now you're dealing with time signatures of 11 and 13 and all sorts of crazy stuff. So Anyhow, so this is all very diatonic and everything's all moving nicely. I mean, this voice leading G, the B to A, G to F sharp, and this guy G, E, D, D, and this guy E, D, C, B, and of course the bass line G, F sharp, E, D, and that's continued throughout the piece. The voice leading is just beautiful at that level, just wonderful stepwise motion like that, wonderful consistent use of color where, yeah, there's a few triads here and there, but mostly he's got color. And you do, once you establish color, triads are kind of naked in comparison. Once you've established, like right off the bat, I thought, okay, it's all triads. Why is he calling it a jazz voicings? But then, so once you've established that amount of color in your piece, you probably want to be fairly consistent about it because if you reintroduce a triad, it's going to sound a little naked in comparison. So you do that when you want that sound. So you'd have to be really careful about not using color once you've used as much as he's used. So it's all diatonic until so this chord here, right? We have this C chord, and it has a ninth in it, has a major seventh. It's a beautiful kind of jazz sound. Bringing that G sharp to lead to the A. Now, technically, oh no, he is doing. I was going to say technically it was the tenor voice doing it, not the bass voice, but it actually is the bass voice. So he's got G sharp leading to A. I would have heard it that way, whether it was technically the tenor or the bass. I would have heard G sharp leading to A. So that's really creating at this point, we hear E, 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 G sharp. I'm singing an octave below. We're hearing basically an E7 chord there, leading to A. That's five. That's the five chord in the key of A minor. A minor is our two chord, right? We're in the key of G. This is our two chord. This E7 chord is the five of two, to use the classical language. I would just as soon call it 6 because I just prefer to call it a little more directly. I know when I see 6 followed by 2, I know that that's a secondary dominant. I don't need to write 5 of 2 followed by 2 just to remind myself that it's a secondary dominant. And again, terms like secondary dominance, if you're not familiar with that, again, that's the kind of stuff my harmony course really just goes into a lot of detail on. So the first bit of chromaticism that he introduces is very classic in that sense. A secondary dominant, something that Bach used over and over and over and over and predates Bach by a long ways. It is a little surprising in that we have this situation in which it's following directly that C, then leaping up to the G sharp in the bass. That leap creates a little bit of a surprise. I would have expected it to be G to G sharp, and then maybe the C to go down to B or C to go up to E. I would have expected the sound that happened on beat 3 to be more clearly an E chord. I mean, it is when I do the math on it, but somehow having heard that C chord ringing, this C leaping to G sharp, I don't even I don't perceive of them as being connected. I perceive of that G sharp as following the G. I hear, all right, G when I really hear the G sharp as being connected to the G. Um, and so my ear is still hearing the C, and so at some level, I'm really hearing this as a very colorful C chord, a C chord with a raised fifth. And so it's even though it's technically actually is an E7 chord going to A minor, a very traditional classical thing, he's introducing it in a way that is kind of suggesting that it's not going to be just a traditional classical thing, which we already know it's not because he's all these ninths he's included, major sevenths and things. But then again, this D sharp creates a leading tone into this E minor chord. E minor chord that has this beautiful color tone of the 11th. This D sharp creates the leading tone into E, meaning he's really creating another secondary dominant. Anytime you see leading tone, new root. Really what it means is you've created a secondary dominant. So really this started off as B minor, and the D sharp makes it be B major or B7. Um, so B7 going to E minor is 5 in the key of E minor, 5 in the key of 6, 5 of 6, or just call it. So far, it feels like, okay, he's brought in some sixths and ninths and interesting, not six, but he's brought in color tones anyhow. He's brought in ninths and well, that's the main color tone actually, is the ninth, but also then major sevenths, and then this 11th there. So it still feels fairly traditional harmonically, but with just this little bit of jazz color added. But it's about to go take 80-degree turn. So yeah, I see a comment now about changing sound. Yeah, I was thinking about doing that, but there's something about this that feels so pianistic that I kind of want to live with it this way. I don't think the tied notes are. In fact, I don't know if there's a different piano sound I could switch to that is any more sustaining. If the mellow grand piano sound sustains more, I've never really thought through that. Maybe so, actually. Maybe I heard that one a little more. Yeah, I think I do hear it more. So I'm going to go with this one for now. Chords now are totally not in keeping with any sort of traditional classical um, way of looking at this stuff. Right? These chords now are no longer classical chords. I can't analyze them in these terms. We've gone from this E minor to basically an E flat major seventh, right? E flat, flat, D, but it's got a ninth in that moving line, and the melody is sharp 11. Okay, now we have absolutely entered jazz land. So far, it was like, well, this is just a kind of a pretty little classical sounding melody with just a little hint of jazz coloration on those ninths. But now we have just gone full bore into jazz land. That chord there, this chord here, the way he's labeled it confused me at first. Um, Yeah, Sam, you do a string version. That's a good point, and I don't know if that was your reason for it. Sam, I'm so glad you're here. This is so beautiful. So uh, the labeling of this as C sharp is confusing to me. What I would say is this in a classical sense of recognizing the C sharp to B flat as an augmented sixth, if this were going to be an augmented no, that's not even an augmented sixth. What the heck is that? That's a diminished. I can't think straight. That is a diminished seventh, so that's not even a augmented sixth. So yeah, I'm not. It basically what I'm saying is, if you call it a D flat, now I recognize what I'm hearing. This flat, B flat, E flat, and G is a D flat 7. E flat, G, B flat is an E flat triad, and that is the seventh. And that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing an E flat 7 with a D flat in the bass. And that makes total sense in the resolution to the A flat chord that follows, right? Get A flat, C, E flat, and then G, major seventh. So this E flat going to A flat makes total sense. So spelling that as D flat makes more sense. So yeah, that's one thing I would change about the spelling of it here. But it also, for that matter, not everything has to make tonal sense. And I'm not sure that everything does in this piece, although maybe it all does. Um, but there when things don't exist for tonal reasons, like here, you definitely call this a E sharp, not an E flat, because it's leading tone in the E. Yeah. Here, you definitely call this E flat because the chord is an E flat chord. There are times when you spell things not according to what they are in the chord, but according to the direction of motion, right? In chromatic, like if you have any chromatic lines, like this little chromatic line here, D, D, if this isn't really meant to be a chord tone, you absolutely spell that D sharp because it's ascending. That's absolutely correct. You spell it E flat when it's descending. Because if I spelt this as E flat, well, now you got to put a natural sign on the E. Who wants that, right? And it makes the resolution not obvious. It looks parallel. E flat, D, but it's two dots on the same line. By spelling it D sharp, you get to see the resolution of that chromatic passing tone actually moving in that direction. So for similar reasons, even if you weren't literally thinking of this as an E flat 7, you spell it D flat rather than C sharp, so I can see the resolution of that non-chord tone, if we want to think of it as such, going down. So anyhow, I'll spell it that way, and because I knew that I recognized the sound when I heard it, but the spelling confused me, and then I did the math on it. I'm like, okay, that's what this sound is amazing because this sound, um, that is, I mean, that's just, 5 to 1 in the key of A flat. But you might ask, well, where did he come up with A flat from? Why is E flat coming in here? So, Sam, I don't know if you were thinking of this or aware of this, but the A flat chord is the flat 2 chord in the key of G, which is what's called the Neapolitan. The flat 2 chord, A flat, is the Neapolitan, and then the Neapolitan chord usually resolves to 5 like this. You have Neapolitan, 5, 1. This is a classic chord progression, and then you took that Neapolitan and gave it a secondary dominant, and then somehow you needed to get from this minor to that predominant, and this E flat major 7 sharp 11 was a really nice way of doing it. It allowed that line what it needed. So when I look at this, I look at this as saying, wow, this just fits together just incredibly well. It's using classic techniques but putting this whole different language on it. And so yeah, I just really love it. So double diminished. So yeah, that I mean when you called it fully diminished, I think is maybe the English term you're looking for. If you would so let's change it this for a second. Um because all right, if we call that C sharp, because the C sharp, the B flat, and the E and the G is totally part of a diminished chord. If we wanted it to be just a diminished triad, things should be in E. E flat is a fine color tone to add to that diminished chord, but I didn't hear enough of the diminished chord to sound diminished. Now, as a natural, it's going to sound diminished. Right? That's a diminished. So I want to hear what it sounds like that way. If it was going to be a diminished chord, probably have made that an A natural. But double diminished, I'm going to come back. There might be something else you mean by that. Works also. There's another thing that is used in jazz world of two diminished chords on top of each other. In other words, a C sharp, G, D flat, and on top of that, the diminished chord that is a whole step above. So E flat, and then G flat. Okay, we'll call it, and then A. So this chord, that sound. You met, Sam? That's a jazz sound. That is a serious jazz sound there. Two diminished chords a whole step apart. Always the lower one on the left hand, and then a whole step above in the right hand. That type of stack is a common diminished chord sound. And then you can leave notes out of the stack, but you have to be careful when you leave notes out of the stack that it doesn't turn it into another chord. So if you had these two notes left out, I think actually if you had, let me just undo all those changes. If all I did was make this E now, then you would have just the plain and you wouldn't have the double thing. So the E flat helped you get that, but it turned it into another chord. If, on the other hand, I made this be a C, which is another note in that chord, right? C sharp diminished on top of E flat diminished. E flat diminished would have a C in it. So this note would be a note in there. The D is part of the bottom diminished chord, and sticking on the top is going to be a little crunchier than I think you might want. But let's see. It doesn't sound like that diminished sound at all to me. Maybe if I add the E flat also, it sounds a little more like it. I think if I add an E here, that sounds more like that double combination diminished sound. Um, but in order to do that, I had to introduce all these extra voices, and it messed up your voice texture. So I think if this wasn't a G in the melody, if you had kept the A in the melody, then I think so again, we undo all my other changes, and I just am gonna change that A, G to an A, so that now the top is 2 out of 3 notes of that diminished chord, or 2 out of 4 notes if you think about a diminished 7th chord. E flat and A, part of that diminished chord. C sharp and B flat are part of the other diminished chord. Yeah, this is weirdly dissonant, though. I don't like it. The problem is the A, doo-doo-dee-dum, I heard it going down. Maybe it's because 'cause I've heard it so many times now, but I definitely wanted to go G, and then this definitely doesn't want to be an A flat A. So let me hear it then. That sounds like that combination diminished sound, but still, I don't like it as much as what you wrote. What you wrote sounds beautiful. I would respell it personally. So that's my feedback there. So anyhow, it once we get past that Neapolitan, that just really clever vibe, back to the chord diatonic. This is also secondary dominant. This is like 2-5-1 in the key of C. D minor, that B is just a hint of a G chord, right? D minor clearly, D minor 7. This B is just enough of a hint of G7 to make me say, "Yeah, I heard a 5 chord in there." 2, 5, 1 in the key of C, and then again using that same trick, and here you are directly connecting it to the G, so that we have that C chord, secondary dominant A, and then so we get to kind of draw out this cadence. Reach the 2 chord, secondary dominant, and then the 2, and finally the 5. So that's just kind of drawing out this 2-5-1 with some extra color around it. Minor 2, dominant 2, half diminished 2, and then finally our 5 with this really nice suspension. In this case, it is a true suspension. This sound here is a D sus chord, D, G, and C, D7 sus, and that C is held over from the previous measure, so it's a totally by the book suspension. Back to our one chord, 5, 6, right? We get the original melody again, really nice. Then slight variation. Now there we have a nice diminished chord. Why is D7 going in? It sounds really nice. This is more jazzisms, right? This kind of parallel motion here. These have the effect of being what's called well, what are drop two voicings, and I don't know that they literally are, but we're going to find out in a second. Um, drop two voicing is the idea of a chord with all the notes close together, but then you take the second to top one and drop it down an octave, and that's essentially what's happening here, right? An A minor chord would have been C and then A in the middle and then E below that. But instead of putting the A in the middle, he's dropped it down here. And that spreads the notes out. And it's just a real typical device when you want to write these parallel textures, because it lets you write these parallel textures with a really nice spacing. The top note is further removed from the second to top note. Here's a diminished chord. That's the other thing that makes me think drop two. I hear the A minor, G sharp diminished, A minor. So you're alternating A minor with the G sharp diminished. And That's such a typical thing. It doesn't require use of drop two voicings, but it's associated with it. So here again, a G sharp diminished chord would be G sharp, B, D. That B should have kind of been in between the G sharp and the D should have been if it was going to be a close position voicing. But we take that second to top note, the B, drop it down here, and bingo, that is our drop two voicing. And then the same with the last voicing. It's A minor. We have A, C is missing, and then E, but the C has been dropped down here. So this passage all drop two stuff. So yeah, this is now like really typical jazz voicing, and playing them as block chords like that in parallel motion is um, totally jazz. And here, except here, now we're holding a common tone, so now it's doing something slightly different, but it's bringing us back to that chorale texture and back to that major. That you did spell it as D flat down here. Look at that, you spelled it as D flat down there. So, and back to our back, back to our. So it's now the same harmonic sequence, um, but just voiced slightly different. I call this Neapolitan, but no one who writes Neapolitans would be putting major sevenths on them normally. If Bach uses a Neapolitan, which he does some, it's not that, it's a triad, right? So just hear it that way. That's how it would sound more if Bach were to have written it. So, this is the jazz version of a Neapolitan where you actually have a major seventh on it. But yeah, five chord. So the passing tone in the bass is a bit. I mean, it's not a bad dissonance, but this is the most sort of calling attention to itself dissonance in the entire piece to me. Um, I don't know if I would have liked it more. I don't know. I'm not even gonna second guess it. But that's the only place where, like, if I had written this, I might have said, "Ooh, is there a different thing I could do that would keep the motion going, but wouldn't create that exact dissonance?" It's the dissonance of the C sharp, it's the D, the minor ninth that I think my ear is picking up on. And that's one of the dissonances that we typically avoid, even in jazz, even in a world where we're in love with a lot of color. Okay, so again, this is a lot of diatonic motion, kind of that same sort of secondary dominant into what could have been an A minor, but he's voiced it in a way that turned it really into D minor. So it's skipping its expected resolution. And maybe it's not even, maybe this G sharp isn't really saying E7, because this time this is still color tone. And now it's going to this sound here, right? He's gone from that was a G chord here. This sound here is at some level a minor four chord, which is my favorite chord that I talk about all the time, and yet it's disguised in a way that I didn't instantly recognize it as such. Um, if this had been reversed, it's fine. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because that actually leads to the B nicely. It doesn't solve the minor ninth, but it's going to be interesting anyhow. A little better actually, Mike. I don't like the triad. I don't actually. I mean, yeah, I don't like it better. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. Uh, it's too plain. It's too plain. So I talked about the whole thing with the color being like once you've established color, you don't want to go back on it. This there's no actual color tones in here, right? This is a D, F sharp, A, and C. The only thing that's selling this to me as being equivalent in color is seventh being in the bass, which is definitely a color of its own. It's not a color tone in the sense of being a ninth or a sixth or a upper extension, but merely putting a seventh in the bass gives this chord a very specific color that I'm willing to accept as being equivalent to the other color. And so, yeah, you know, I suspect that that's the right choice. Um, but yeah, it just makes me want to try other things. But anyhow, we have our minor four chord and major four, which is kind of the opposite of how that progression usually works. Usually it's a four, major four to minor four to one. But here he's got it the other way around. Minor, major four, five. I said he didn't have a five, but he does have a five. It just has, it's a sus five. It's D7 sus, voiced as a C triad over the D. I saw the C triad, failed to notice the D. So yeah, it is five. So anyhow, this is just gorgeous, just absolutely gorgeous, and I just love what you've done with it, Sam. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, there's yeah, that's all really just beautiful stuff, and just I would say textbook examples of good things, but applied in a way that I've never seen any textbook use examples like this. So originally I had said in email that I wanted to get Heiss's piece in here, and I think I'm gonna not I think I'm gonna talk about it next week because there's plenty to talk about it there, but I am gonna just play it out here uh, to finish, um, because he specifically asked for feedback. It's a work in progress, and so I'm going to let you guys listen to it. So to me, so this is a concert band piece, and he's got like a program to it. He talks about how each section of it is indicating something different about the whole pandemic and how things are going on, protests, curfew, etc., people breaking curfew, and so forth. And the piece itself is designed to kind of tell a story about that. So I'm going to just play bits of it. Stop there. That's kind of this first section, and he's actually hasn't even broken it down that far because he talks about all measures 31 through 36 being about the approach. But there actually is a change in sound that happens here, and that's how I want you to think about it: is how are the different sections new little rhythmic thing that happens. So it's telling a little story in itself there. Just those four bars are telling a story, the change of texture. And then the tempo changes, and it changes texture again. The da-da-da-da moves down to the brass. I guess it was in the brass, but it leaves the woodwinds here. So we get to see that texture go on for a little while, but then that texture goes away. And now percussion is coming in telling that story, right? So I want you to really think about the orchestration choices made in here because he's gone to the trouble of laying out a story being told, and think about how that works. This isn't a piece where the story is about the harmonic motion. There is some stuff going on, and there is some specific use of kind of what I would call polytonality, places where one section is in one key and another section is almost like in a different key. And I have a feeling that's relating to this sounds of a party being heard from the house. I have a feeling that relates to that. Um, but yeah, I would love it if you guys would go to this piece. And so let me post the link here in the chat. There we go. So go listen to it and give some feedback on it and really think through these things. Then maybe we'll regroup and talk about it in more detail next week, as well as anything else that people have submitted. Because yeah, I feel like I want to spend enough time to do this one justice. But I just got so wrapped up in really wrapping my brain around Sam's piece that I didn't leave myself as much time as I would have wanted to go into this. But that's okay. There's always next week. So I hope everyone has enjoyed this session today. We've sort of covered a lot of different territory, um, but a lot of it had to do with the idea of voice leading, and so it was interesting different ways of looking at voice leading in different contexts. So if you want to sort of take a step back and think about a theme, maybe that was an overall theme. But then also we really got it a little bit into harmony a little bit more, but mostly me just accepting the harmony that was there and talking about how he took secondary dominance, the diminished chord, and the Neapolitan, which are all real traditional things that you can learn about in my harmony course, but apply them in such really creative ways that it was just really beautiful. So with Heiss's piece, it's really telling a fantastic story here, and I really want to dig into that a little more and how the different orchestrations, how the different sections are working on that story. And Heiss, if you end up making some changes to it between now and next week, that's fine. We'll get to see the updated version. So once more, I want to thank everyone for being here. And I just really enjoy doing this. I just love being able to look at music and talk about what makes it work, and talk about choices that were made, choices that could have been made differently. And you can take that information for what it's worth. And I always think of it as, if I suggest, hey, this could have gone this way, that means, well, the next verse of the song or the next piece of the song, if you want to make it longer, it could do that the next time. And Sam already did in his piece, has similar passages that are treated differently. Like this measure is not the same as this measure, right? It's the same section of the melody, but he treats it differently. So that's an example where just getting some feedback on, oh, here's another way of treating it, means you don't have to change the first way. It just means you introduce another one. You introduce another section of the piece in which it does the other thing. So in any case, I really enjoy doing these. I hope you enjoy listening, and hope, and it's always different levels, right? Some stuff is really basic, some stuff is super advanced, and I don't know. I find it useful, and I hope you do too. So that said, I'm going to sign off and see you all next time. So thank you again so much for being here.